Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. Let's talk a little bit about transactional relationships. Before I get to that, don't forget to back the King Leper campaign. You can get yourself a limited edition hardback or get the ebook. Link is down below in the description box. Transactional relationships. I have talked about this many times and I have written about it on Substack or my blog, but I wanted to make a video specifically talking about kind of the inheritance, the curse of transactional relationships that all of us post-boomer have inherited as the normative way that relationships exist, whether we're talking about romantic relationships or friendships. The idea that there is a transaction. I get something and you get something, and that's the way that it is and the way that it ought to be. That's something we've inherited, but it's not always been the case, nor is it an ideal we necessarily need to strive for. So this came to the forefront of my mind because I was watching a video from the wildly named Homath, a channel who talks a lot about relationships and that sort of thing. And the video was called "I Am the Table." And maybe I'll link it down below. It's like part of he has a series of like self-maximize, which is like how to maximize yourself to get the best stuff out of life. And this video is in no way wrong, but he's just very explicit about relationships, especially romantic relationships, are transactional. And that is the normative experience that we've inherited. And there's a class of women who think that the transaction is I exist and you give me things. And that's not realistic, and it puts them in a bad place where they don't get what they want, which is a loving relationship, really, and anything from a man, and men who interact with them really don't get anything from them, any kind of loyalty or anything like that. So that's an important element. That is realistic, and that is the inheritance that we've gotten from the boomers and our secular society. And the secularization of our society really matters. Now, this is not to throw any shade at Homath, because I think he has correctly circumscribed the nature of a modern secular relationship, right, in our secular society. That is one that is divorced from the influences of church, the virtues that it teaches, and the social pressures that come with church. We are constantly negotiating with each other all of the natures of our relationship based on the transactions that are there. But that is not necessarily the ideal. What's missing is charity. Charity is loving people not for their own sake, but for God's sake, right? As an extension of Christ's charitable gift to us on the cross. It's an undeserved gift. That is, you're giving people something that they don't deserve. I had a parable about this that I published a few years back. I think it was called The Parable of the Rich Man, or the Rich and the Lazy Farmer. And they had this rich farmer who's always bailing out this lazy farmer, and everybody's giving him crap about it because, the lazy farmer is just not taking care of his own, and he keeps helping him out. And it's really about charity. It's like, I'm helping this person because it's my money, it's my fields. Like, I can help him out if I want to. I can do that if I want to, simply because I care about him. And this ideal is reflected in lots of our art that's pre-baby boomer. So if you look at something like Lord of the Rings, you have this relationship between Sam and Frodo, not a romantic relationship. And the fact that people are projecting romance upon it because they can't imagine friends actually caring about each other shows a lot about how our relationships, our interpersonal relationships in our society, have degraded over time to where we view everything as a this for that kind of situation. But that ideal of friendship, of like, I'm literally going to go to the ends of the earth, I'm going to go to hell with you just because you're my friend, and I'm going to take care of you because you're my friend. And anyone who's been in a high stress situation and risked their life for a friend, like on the battlefield, that's not exactly a thing that's like, well, maybe if I save Bill, he'll give me something. You're not thinking transactionally in that moment. You're acting on honor. You're acting on it with charity and things like that. So we lose that. Once we lose that, it becomes difficult to maintain any relationship over the long term. And maybe it's realistic, right? I don't think he's wrong. And it's realistic, especially if you're in the secular society and you're dealing with secular people, that the relationship is going to start as transactional. And maybe later it can develop into a true commitment or a covenant or a bond that will last through the hard times. Maybe the transaction can go more than just right now and go into further time. Because I will tell you, the truth is that I have suffered this tragedy myself, which is that transactional relationships do not last. Because sooner or later, somebody can't give what the other person wants in some way, shape, or form. And if that causes that relationship to end, whether it's a friendship or it's a romantic relationship, it breaks up, right? People divorce, people break up with just boyfriends and girlfriends, people stop talking to friends. I remember this, and I'm not bitter about it because I know that this is just the nature of our societies. I've had friends that just disappeared when things were tough for me, right? When I couldn't give them things, when I couldn't give them, whether it was in the music scene, like I couldn't give them gigs, I wasn't around to loan them things, like loan them equipment, or, I wasn't in a place, I was in a place where I couldn't throw parties, or I couldn't buy beer, I couldn't go out because I was broke, I was having a hard economic time. Those people disappeared. They didn't care about me, right? And when they were suffering, I would buy them things. Like I remember this guy, I'm not going to say his name because I don't need to call him out, but I came up to visit him and he was real excited to see me, and he was like too broke to buy any beer. And we were at a bar. I'm like, you know what? I'll buy you a beer because I'm doing okay. I have some money. I'll buy you a beer. I'm working, whatever. No big deal. I can buy a friend a beer just because I love him, right? Just because I care about him. And, things turned around on me eventually, right? Like I ended up in a really bad place. And I remember running into him at a restaurant with his family and my family, right? And he just pretended he didn't know me because I hadn't, it was just like, what do you mean? Like, I'm not even like in a particularly bad place. I'm going to a dinner with my family, but I couldn't hang out with him for a while because, I didn't have work for a couple of months, right? That's all. Sometimes you end up in a spot where you're not working for like 2 months. And so you can't just spend money. You can't spend money like crazy. And so that's where I was. And I just remember that moment is like, okay, when times were tough for you, you were happy to have a friend. But when I couldn't spend money, you were not really happy to have a friend because that friendship would require something of you. And so part of the transaction there is really just people wanting things and not even seeing it's a transaction. They're like, over time, they're like, oh, well, you helped me when I was having a rough time. I'll help you when you have a rough time. Some people are incapable of that, right? So they are acting like I am the table. I should get things because I'm your company now. I'm good. I'm good friend now. Right. I think there's a Woods of Ypres song that's like about that. It's like good friends when things are good, and when things are bad, they're gone. They disappear. That's reality. So a lot of people have experienced that. And it's the same thing with romance. Like you get into a relationship and then maybe you're not doing great anymore. You lose your job or you decide to take a risk and a business doesn't do well. And then your girlfriend breaks up with you because she's used to you. She feels like you're not going anywhere in life, things like that. Can't see you through the hard spots. And so maybe that's transactions over time, but I still think the big curse of us, people who are, say, Gen X and younger, really millennials are the biggest hit. And I think Homath is a millennial, right? I'm pretty sure he's a millennial, which makes a lot of sense because he's correctly viewing all of the relationships he's experienced as transactional. And this goes all the way back to us being children. Our relationship with our parents was in a lot of ways transactional. I remember lots of kids getting excited because their parents would give them money for getting A's on their report card. They got paid $10 per A that they got on their report card, right? They were rewarded for it. I got nothing, right? Because my parents loved me unconditionally. And they're like, no, you need to achieve good grades for your own benefit, not because I'm going to reward you for it. And as a kid, I was like, I want to get a reward for this. It's like, yeah, but there's a deeper level there. My parents are constantly trying to instill that. You need to be doing the dishes because you want to help we want to help our household be better, right? And I was like, okay, you're kind of guilting me into doing the dishes, but Every relationship I had outside of that was like purely transactional. So most of us had transactional relationships. We experienced divorce with our parents. My parents didn't get divorced, but lots of my friends did. Why did their parents get divorced? Well, I'm not getting what I want out of this marriage, so therefore I'm out of here. I'm not getting what I want out of this marriage, so I'm going to go sleep with someone else. Right? That happened a lot. So baby boomers got divorced a lot. They were the first generation to really embrace that. And I think that comes from the secularization of marriage. Marriage becoming, rather than a covenant, something really deep and sacred and religious, it becomes something that is a contract, temporary contract, which can be broken when you feel like it needs to be broken. And we've inherited that. We've inherited that view of our marriages, that view of our relationships. And so, again, there's nothing incorrect about what he's saying. Rather, we are inheriting a situation that is very different from how it was, say, for our grandparents or great-grandparents' generation, where people still were full of charity for other people, including the people that they loved in their life, where you would go to a gunfight for your friend simply because he was your friend. Not because you thought that you needed him to go to a gunfight for you, right? But because he was your friend, you would go help him out with something. All right. These ideals that pop up in our fiction, maybe they're not always fully realized in the real world, right? But you could probably think of plenty of real world examples. You just need to look at war stories to see what I'm talking about. But we idealize them in fiction because we are trying to achieve that ideal of a true perfect friendship where we actually love and care for each other in a charitable way, and we're trying to act virtuously for each other's sake and for God's sake. What do we see in fiction now? Well, we see a lot of transactional relationships, which means millennials are writing a lot of fiction where the relationship is not one which is charitable. And I see another fantasy that's kind of like the childish fantasy, the girl version of Peter Pan in a lot of romance novels, which is the billionaire loves me even though I'm curvy, which means the billionaire magically loves the fat girl. And since I'm a fat girl, I'm going to read this and fantasize a billionaire loving me for reasons that don't have to do with my body. Meanwhile, the standards for a billionaire are going to be very high because he can choose. He has a lot more choices. Now, he might love you despite your body, right? Or he might be a chubby chaser and like you because of your body. And he has a weird fetish, right? It's just a little bit outside of the norm. He's like, something's a little bit different, you know? But I wouldn't count on that, right? Rather, you should count on how do you get the best by being your best. That's where we are now. So the fantasy is like, maybe someone will like me for some inner self, but that's still not charity, right? You wouldn't hope that someone would love you because you have some special super virtue that's inside of you that no one else can see, some like Gnostic virtue, but rather, because you're good for that other person, because you have virtue that's outside of it. And the fantasy is like, they'll like me anyway. They'll like me even though I don't. I'm not exhibiting the virtues that would be obvious for someone to pick. Anyway, that's my thoughts on that. Transactional relationships. Leave me your thoughts down below. To me, it's kind of a sad situation that we arrive in, and I can see how it has resulted in a lot of decay of relationships, relationships breaking up, marriages breaking up, friendships failing, disconnect with siblings and other members of communities because we have lost our ability to be charitable in the absence of a religious society, in the absence of a Christian society. We've lost a lot of that ability. And when I say charitable, I don't mean giving money to some charitable organization for a tax write-off. I mean actively loving another person for God's sake, doing things for them because you're not going to get something in return, whether or not you will, right? But because they need it and because you care about them as a human being and because God cares for you. That's something that's a deeper level. I think Aquinas said that we're actually incapable of understanding charity without Christ. It's a deficiency of the soul that can only be solved with faith and with a relationship with Christ. So I'm not going to, that's a grand paraphrasement. And it's been a while since I've super read Aquinas outside of the usury stuff, which I care about a lot too. But anyway, leave me your thoughts down below and I'd love to read them. And don't forget to back the Kickstarter campaign, King Leper, which this guy is searching for love, and he's looking for a kind of transaction and really hoping for something deeper. That's in this story too. There's a deep romance there. So please check it out. And I will see you all next time. Have a great, great day.